Greetings, all my relations, those who I know and those who I'm going to become familiar with through this conference. It's an honor to be the chair of this particular presentation, where we have three incredible voices in jurisprudence and legal field from Indigenous women. And I know better than to get in the way of Indigenous women, and I know my place. I'm currently a professor in the Department of Indigenous Studies, and I am a Wemstishkio. So that's the only thing you have to know about me. I'm going to, we're going to have each of them come up on their own, and they'll give you their own positionality and presentation. But miigwech, tanse, and thank you for being here. So the first presenter is Dawnis Kennedy.
Okay, bonjour. Is it working? Oh, now it's working. Okay. I'm going to keep track of my time. But bonjour nantinuwe bangretuk, minawana gogishuk nindashnekas, bagawanish kuzi bing and donji, wabaji shi and do them. So my name is Happy Day Woman. I come from what's now known as Rosa River Anishinaabe First Nation. I am Martin Clan, which means I am what's known to be warrior clan. I might not look like your typical warrior, but in Anishinaabe, when we say Ogichita or Ogichita Kwe, and there isn't anything of war in that name. Ogichita is a person of a big heart. Ogichita Kwe is a woman of a big heart who carries that big heart. And so I've been raised also by the elders and the Ogichita Society of Bagawanish as Ogichita Kwe, and I carry that. And I'm really grateful to be here today. And I'll introduce myself to you. That's all I'm going to do. I don't have a presentation, so I just have an introduction. I'm just going to take more time. And people who know me know that's how I am. So I really appreciate my colleagues, my friends, and I'm really excited about what they're writing on, because I'm new to my appointment in criminal justice. And I am a Treaty 1 information carrier, and I've sought to understand what that means my entire life, from as far as I could remember wanting to know, and even beyond that when my grandparents told me I needed to know. So for me, that's what I have to share with you. I also want to acknowledge in the room that one of my uncles from Shingwak, Ginamagewickamik, Daryl Busno, is here, and he is like a youth leader. He's been a leader since he was a youth and in education, and it marked a great deal of my journey, the work that they did to honor Chief Shingwa Kun's vision. And I think that's important. If you know about Chief Shingwa Kun's and you know about Shingwak Indian Residential School, get to know Shingwak Ginamagewickamik and Algoma University and the trust and the treaty that they have between them. That gave me a space to finally learn what I wanted to know about treaties after looking everywhere, because I wanted to know about treaties from who I am as an Anishinaabe Kwe. And it was vision of Chief Shingwa Kun's that created that space, that learning place. And it was my fasting vision that brought me to Shingwak Ginamagewickamik. So for me, it was really spirit-led. The spirit led us to what I needed to know and to the kind of space that we need for our people. And when I say for our people, I don't just mean Anishinaabe. We are, I don't know if you know this about Anishinaabe or if you know this about me, but I'm related to all of creation. You are all my relations. So if I say I have an uncle here, or I have my sisters here, or I have my brother here, my mom and dad weren't that productive. But it's true. Like, for me, it's like a worldview. And I wouldn't want to introduce myself here without acknowledging my Mennonite family. So I don't know if anybody had the privilege to know March Heinrichs, but she was my auntie. She drew the short straw at a journal to write an article about the powwow, and so she was the one who had to go to the powwow. She met my family, she met my community, she met my people, and she never left. She and her family raised our children in care, showed up at our sweat lodges, and supported our community. And when she lost her son suddenly, she came to my kuku. Her and I, my kuku and I, went to, right away, as soon as we heard the news, we went, because I had lost my mom at 17. And it was a long time coming, but it was still so sudden. And so I went there with my grandmother, and we offered our heart to her, and she came to my kuku when she was grieving. And she wanted to know how she was going to live without her child. My kuku had some experience. And she took her out on the land, on the grass, and we looked for 4-leaf clovers. And after a long time was quiet, she said, "Tell me, I want to know everything about your boy, from his first to his last breath. Tell me about him." And Marge treated me like a daughter since then. She came to all my graduations at University of Toronto. There wasn't anywhere she wouldn't fly to be, or she came to my wedding, and there wasn't anybody who could tell her that she couldn't take pictures of the ceremony. She took that role. And I want to acknowledge her. I want to acknowledge my siblings, and I want to acknowledge my nieces and nephews who are Mennonite, and I want to share those words today. Oh, I'm halfway done my introduction. Okay, so now I'll talk about treaties. I'm Treaty 1 information carrier, and we say that here, right? Like, did you guys do land acknowledgement? Did they talk about it being Treaty 1 territory? Okay, that's good. A plus. But then that's only the first step, right? Because it is Treaty 1 territory, and our ancestors were here for Treaty 1. And if you ever read anything about Treaty 1, or you read the treaty, that's even less than the first stop. If you want to think about Treaty 1, to me, what a treaty, it's a guedewinan, a coming together. A guedewinan, it's a coming together. So you can learn about that by a guedewinan Center, by the Forks. There's a treaty center by the National Center or Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba. Okay, that's the one. Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba. You can go there and you can learn about our treaties there. A guedewinan is a coming together. It's a coming together of more than one. And Treaty 1, the written text, doesn't represent the coming together that happened. It doesn't reflect the coming together that was present in the tobacco that was placed into the Treaty 1 pipes that were lifted to all of creation, and that are still working in my community, in my family, that passed from my uncles, my other uncle, I have more than one uncle, my uncle's bundle to his son. So it doesn't reflect that because it was written only by one side of the treaty. Only all the things they wanted. And if you read it, talks about all these lands and all these boundaries and how far this Treaty 1 land goes. But it doesn't talk about the words that came after the pipe. And if you go to the Agoa Dewenan Center, you'll see those words. Waters flow, and as long as the grass, what does grass do? It grows. This is as long as these words shall last. That means pretty much as close as you can get to forever. These treaties are forever, or they're as forever as I would want for my people to be here, because who would want to walk this earth without the cool grass? Who would want to travel life without the waters that are the beginning of all life? Who would want to get up in the morning without the light of the sun? These are traditional words of treaty, not just of Treaty 1. They're not just like a rhythm between Treaty 1. It means treaties are forever. And if treaties are forever, it means that Treaty 1, whatever we know about Treaty 1, even though it's hard for me to know what was in that tobacco, I know it's not in that written paper, but I don't know everything that I would have known that was in Treaty 1 if it had not been for residential school, if it had not been for day school, if it had not been for public school, if we all had followed the vision of Chief Shingwa Kunz in education, I would have known a lot more, because my grandparents and one of my great-grandparents was taken as a child when we would have been trained. And so that information, it's like strands coming towards me, not full, but a little bit here, a little bit there, right? And I've always tried to know what is it that I would have known if not for residential school. Because I want that. I want that to be known for my great-grandchildren. I want them to know, to not feel like they only have little strands. I want them to know a good dewenan. I want them to know the coming together thoughts that their ancestors lifted to be witnessed by all of creation in the pipe. And I know, even if I don't know everything about Treaty 1, I know that there was like a newspaper article that I can hear about the negotiations. I know the stories from my community that came because we had a treaty recorder who was 12 years old listening. And he lived a long time, and he talked a lot. So my grandparents and my grandfather's brother talked to us a lot. So I know that. But I do know that if they lifted the pipe at Treaty 1, and if treaties last for as long as the sun shines, as long as the grass grows, and as long as the waters flow, then I know that whatever was agreed to at Treaty 1 will honor the treaty that came before that. And the treaty that came before Treaty 1, you can think of, there's 3 of them. They're known as the Treaty of Niagara. So there's the two-row wampum, there's the 24 Nations belt, and the covenant chain. They were actually given to Anishinaabe by the British in our treaty-making tradition of wampum belts, because they had been made with the Haudenosaunee, our traditional enemies. And so that's how we became, it wasn't from Anishinaabe to the British, but the British to the Anishinaabe. And whatever was in those treaties, I know that they honor the treaty that came before that. And the treaties that came before that weren't even with settlers. They were with Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee. So the Three Fires Confederacy and the Six Nations Confederacy, we held treaty together. And so the treaties that were made with the settlers at the Niagara, they honor the treaty that came before that. And I know that that treaty honors the treaty that came before that, that came before that, that came before that. And I want to tell you, when I was in Shingwakinamagewikimik, I was invited there to co-teach with our late teacher, Badwe Daneban, Eddie Benton Benet. And he said, you know, I don't know law, and I don't know Canadian law. So he said, we got to put together these law and treaty courses. And I said, well, I don't know the law I want to know. I know about Western law, I know about Canadian law, but I don't know about Onakanagewan, Anishinaabe Onakanagewan, our law. And he's like, okay, well, let's do this together then. And he could read Anishinaabe law. I showed him pictures of like archival material, and he could read it in the language. And so together we created courses that didn't get to Indian settler treaties until the 13th week of a 13th week class. We talked about all the treaties between Indigenous peoples and the animals and the plant world and the stars and the insects even. And we talked about the treaties, the broken stick treaties that came before all of those treaties. And we talked about, but we didn't talk about the first treaty. And I had a grandmother, the late Bidasage Ba, the late Josephine Mandaman. She was a student in my first class that I got graduated from Badwe Daneban. He taught and I helped. Then we taught together and he led. Then we taught together and I led. And in the fourth year, I taught it on my own. And in that class was Josephine Mandaman. And she really wanted an A+. But she didn't do the readings. And she said I was her meanest teacher, because I would ask her, and you know what, we have an obligation to tell the truth as an Anishinaabe, and she would say, yeah, no, I didn't do the reading. We had to read together in class with like a big, she said it was too small, I blew it up to like tabloid size, and we read together. But you know what, her last paper, it was, I said, write about something I don't know about. Write about something you know about. That's what I want for A+. And she said that, I still remember, it was only the first lines. I only had to read 2 lines, and I was like, okay, A+++. She said, what would you think about if I asked you right now to close your eyes and think about treaty? She said, for me, I would think about our first treaty, our treaty with our mother, the earth. Unwritten, unspoken, but understood to mean we will take care of her as she takes care of each and every one of us. A+++. And to me, that's treaty. That's a first treaty. And it doesn't stop with Treaty 1. We can't say this is Treaty 1 territory alone, because this is also the homeland of the Métis Nation or nations. this is also a place where the Dakota Oyate have declined treaty with settler society. But they still hold treaties with us, Anishinaabe. So it's still their treaty territory. It's the treaty of the big drum. So that's their treaty, but it has not yet been extended to the Canadian state, and I doubt it ever will. At least not if Catherine Whitecloud has anything to say about it. But that's what I have to share. Thank you for listening to my introduction. Miigwech.
Thank you, Dawnis. I feel like I should share some words, but I don't want to. I want to introduce our next speaker, a renowned legal scholar. Don't laugh. It's true. It's very true. Somebody that we're very fortunate to have. We just had a wonderful teaching, and I'd say almost ceremonial presentation by Dawnis, and now we're going to have another teaching from Brenda Gunn. Brenda?
Tanshikyo Brenda Gunn, Dishni Keshon, and Michifnia, Winnipeg, Otania. Guns, lions, muckles, swains, minon to femi. Thank you, everyone. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm giggling because I just noticed the baby grand piano, and I was thinking if I had kept up with the lessons I did in high school, I could have perhaps played my presentation for all of you. I don't know if I've ever presented in a room where there's a baby grand sitting beside. Oh, there was a button. It doesn't look like a button. I can cut my own mic, apparently. So, I also want to acknowledge that my Métis ancestry comes from my dad's side. My dad is nothing but Métis. His family comes from just north of Winnipeg, around St. Clemens. He was born and raised in Selkirk, just outside of Selkirk. And my mom is nothing but Mennonite. So my mom was a fair and a penner. My grandparents were born around Winkler, Schonsenfeld, I think. I don't really know where that is, but apparently it was a little village. I don't even know if it still exists. Quite. It does? Okay, excellent. So this is a really special place for me to be because my worlds don't normally collide. And so I really love the opportunity to be here, and I have to thank Christy for inviting me, even though it meant doing work. And one of my friends once said to me that Brenda doesn't take any presentations, that she has to do work, because I get a lot of invitations, so I kind of recycle the same things over and over. But today what I want to talk about is treaties, reconciliation, and the justice system. And so I really want to thank Dawnis for starting us off and for sharing such a profound history and context for treaties. I was really hoping she was going to talk about that because her knowledge is so deep, and her way of presenting is so amazing and right to the heart, right? So her words always go straight to the heart. So I want to thank her for setting that up. I get to skip a whole bunch of slides that I wasn't going to do justice to. But I do think it's important to acknowledge when I speak about treaties and how I understand what treaties were about, where that information comes from. It comes from Dawnis. She is one of my big teachers in everything in life, how to carry myself. what to do when I'm having meltdowns about things. She is someone that I can call when I'm freaking out, and she just says, grab some tobacco and go to the river. You'll be okay. But I also have been part of the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba for a long time now. And while I get the opportunity to speak about treaties, I also get an opportunity to sit and learn with the elders. And I also had an opportunity for a few years to do some work with the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Elders Council when they were interested in doing some work to think about new ways to push the government towards treaty implementation. And so I had an opportunity to spend some time sitting and learning with the elders more intensely during that period of time. So I'm really grateful, particularly to people like Elder Bone from Kusikowainan, and the elder painters, Elder Darcy Linklater, who has since passed, but someone that my spouse's family was familiar with, Elder Laughlin from Pasquet Cree Nation, and others as well. So I'm going to skip to the parts of my presentation that are more focused on what reconciliation looks like, the role of treaties, and thinking about why the impacts of the criminal justice system can be viewed as being so profoundly violent for many Indigenous peoples. And some of this, actually, maybe I'll back up a slide here. When I talk about treaties, I bring in what I have learned, but I also always like to pull quotes from a collection of treaty elder teachings that the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba has pulled together. It's a 4-part series of books that Darren Kirshane worked with the Treaty Relations Commission, and they went and visited with elders across the provinces to understand what treaties are, and many of the elders spoke in their language, and the book is in often in an Indigenous language with some English translations. So it is a great place to learn and hear from elders, and so it's called Treaty Elders Teachings, and it's available at McNally Robinson, and is a great resource. So a place that you can also go and learn. And so, as Dawnis has already pointed out, the treaties being about relationship and caring for one another. And so that for me is a big part of what I want to pull out. And so what I want to think about and build on is from what Dawnis was saying about what treaties were about and some of the challenges that have existed with the relationship with our treaty partners. I want to start thinking about what is reconciliation. And I feel like, and I wanted to include this particularly because we are October 4th, is that today's date? So we're very close to the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, which is a day of remembering and hopefully a day of action to address the harms of residential school and celebrate our cultures that have continued to exist. And so I think a lot of people this week are really focused on reconciliation, and I hope it's a good launch pad for everyone for action for the next year. And so part of what I think we need to do in this work is actually understand what reconciliation means. And there's lots of definitions out there. There's dictionaries that you can read, and there's lots of debates about whether reconciliation is an appropriate term, whether there was whether it's actually a bringing back together or not. And so when I think of reconciliation and the work ahead of us, I really do turn to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, because they are the people that spent years sitting with survivors and community members and engaging with knowledge keepers and survivors and youth and academics. And so the definition that or the working idea, I don't want to call it a definition because it's bigger than that, but the working idea that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission set out is that reconciliation is about establishing and maintaining a mutually respectful relationship between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal peoples in this country. And when I hear and read that definition, all I can think is treaties. From what I've learned, that's exactly what the treaties were. And wearing my legal hat, there's a lot of ideas. People are starting to get that, we can't just look at the written text of the treaty, that it was more than that. But a lot of people in Manitoba still hold this idea that the numbered treaties in this territory are land cession treaties, that at heart that the agreement was about the First Nations in this area giving up rights to their lands for some sort of benefit, that was sort of the quid pro quo. And I think Dawnis very clearly set out that was not the intention, as the elders have explained to me. It was about building a relationship and how we were going to live together in a new way and what that relationship was going to be like. So when I think of reconciliation, I do actually think that there is part of our work that is coming back to a mutually respectful relationship, the relationship that was first set out in the treaty negotiations and conversations. And so that's where I think when we start to think about the impacts of the criminal justice system can start to be so profound, because of the ways in which taking people from communities and the imposition has been so damaging, not just to the relationship, but to the other treaty partner, right? So rather than creating setting out the basis for a relationship, what the Canadian government has done is use the treaty as a basis to assert control and power over the partner, and then use that power to eradicate the partner. So it feels like the complete opposite end of what the spirit and intent of the treaties was to be about this relationship. And so part of the work going forward around reconciliation, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission says that in order to establish and maintain this relationship, we have to reject the paternalistic and racist foundations as the ongoing basis for the relationship. And so here again, I think there's a lot of work that we need to do in Canada to really understand how deep the racism is built into our systems and structures that exist in Canada. So we're not just talking about racism where people hold stereotypes or misinformation about other people. What I think about when I think about the racist foundations is I think about the ways in which systems are set up to continually engage in genocidal acts against our treaty partner. So that is part of the deep work that needs to happen, and I think there's no bigger place to see how this operates than the criminal justice system, which is one of the legacy areas that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission highlighted. They noted particularly racism in the healthcare system, in the education system, in the child welfare system, and the justice system as four of the biggest systems that are perpetuating the racism and genocidal actions of the Canadian state that were emblematic in the residential school system. And so the process of reconciliation, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission says it requires a commitment to mutual respect, which again I think of as not just an individual, how we respect each other as individuals and how we live beside each other, but also how the Canadian system respects Indigenous peoples and Indigenous governance and our ability to make decisions for ourselves. And so when the TRC talks about reconciliation, also supports Aboriginal people as they heal from the destructive legacies of colonization, I don't see that as just an individual healing. It's not just the individual work of members who experience trauma or are experiencing intergenerational trauma that need to heal, but also how our nations have the space and time to heal to ensure that our sovereignty is sometimes the word, self-determination is the word I use out of international law, our ability to just make decisions for ourselves, for the relations that we have responsibilities to. So that healing work then is about looking at where is the Canadian system having had and continuing to have destructive impacts on our nations, in finding ways to heal and move forward with mutual respect to build a mutually respectful relationship. And I love the last bullet point, and I try to put it out everywhere, because what this work is going to be, I used to have a lot of media requests, and so it was especially around the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Well, what does reconciliation look like? And it was the toughest question to answer, and then all of a sudden I was like, it's that my little 6-year-old girl gets to continue to live in the security of who she is, with the same health outcomes, the same opportunities that others exist in Canada, because my daughter is much darker skinned than my husband and I, who is Cree from Puckatawagan Cree Nation, and we started trying to learn a bit of Cree at home and trying to keep it fun and light, because she is an intergenerational survivor, and so we don't want to sort of make the work of coming back to her culture work. We tried to make it fun, so we were using TikTok, and so she's learned a few phrases, and she loves Notorious Cree. That is her favorite TikToker. And one day she says to me, and so we know about maybe 20 or 30 words, and one day she says to me, Mom, I think soon I'm going to speak so much Cree, maybe only Cree. What is Miss Warren, her teacher, going to do? She's not going to understand me. And my instinct was to correct her, like, we're nowhere near fluent. But actually, what it was the pride that she had that she spoke her language. And I was like, oh, don't undercut that. And so that for me was the best moment, but my biggest fear, that at some point in life, someone is going to take that away. And so that's the transformation that I see needs to happen. My niece is trying to call me because we're having a garage sale at my parents', and I think my niece wants to know how much to sell something for. Not the time, Lizzie. So for our subsequent generations to have that place. So I'm not talking little tweaks. Sometimes I think when we talk about reconciliation, we want to make it feel doable and accessible, and so you get really positive senses of like, we just got a little work to do. And part of what I'm wanting to say here today is, no, profound transformation is required, not in the individual people that are here, because I agree in the mentality of most people in this society, it's just a little bit more education, a little bit more information on things they can do, but the transformation needs to happen deep in our systems. And so here's a bit more on treaty and reconciliation from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And Elder Fred Kelly, who is from Treaty 3, he says, if reconciliation is to be real and meaningful in Canada, it must embrace the inherent right of self-determination through self-government envisioned in the treaties. So that's part of the transformation that we need to think about, is how do we work towards addressing the profound racism within Canadian systems and recognize the role of self-government, bringing back and upholding those original visions and promises of treaties. And so here, this is a justice conference, I believe, and so this is where I'm going to try to bring in some justice in the, I don't know, what do I have, 5 minutes left? 5? 4. Those are 4 fingers. Okay. So what I want to start to think about is how the justice system plays in here. And so we have long known in Manitoba about the profound systemic discrimination that exists. And so the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People in the 90s laid out that the greatest contribution to overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples in the justice system was the colonial values that underline criminal law and justice. And so we also have the Manitoba Aboriginal Justice Inquiry that finished its work in the 90s, where they noted that it's not just that the justice system has failed Aboriginal people, that justice has also been denied. So what we can see is not only is the justice system not working for Indigenous peoples, it's actually one of the key systems that is perpetuating the colonial agenda. And so part of, I think, what we need to understand is what is systemic discrimination, because it's really easy, I think, to sort of figure out when a person is discriminating against you, or a workplace, or, you know, when a law is treating someone different. But systemic discrimination can be defined as the patterns of behavior, policies, or practices that are part of the structures of an organization which create or perpetuate disadvantage for racialized persons. Right? And so systemic discrimination can be intentional, or it can occur through adverse impacts. And so one of the things that we see when we're looking at connecting systemic discrimination around the justice system, and this is, again, one of my favorite quotes from the Manitoba Aboriginal Justice Inquiry, the justice system has discriminated against Aboriginal people by providing legal sanction for their oppression. So not only has the justice system had discrimination against Indigenous peoples, but it's been used as a tool, right? So children could be imprisoned for running away from residential schools. So you run away from the abuse you're experiencing and the trauma of being taken from your families, and you could end up in jail. Families could be jailed for failing to send their kids to residential school, right? So this justice system becomes part of the tools, and then what we see is how the justice system, after the residential school system, continues to be used as a tool against Indigenous people. So the justice system is meant to keep us safe, but rather what we see is that the way in which stereotypes against Indigenous peoples get used to have an impact. So when you think about the justice system as you know, something where the same law is applied equally to all people, adverse impacts talks about how those neutral general policies have a negative impact. And I wish I could say Dawnis and I planned this, but she told this one of the best stories. I mean, all of her stories are great, but about Josephine Mandaman telling the truth. And actually, this is one of the most significant areas of adverse impacts of criminal justice on Indigenous peoples that we don't talk about, and I'll end here. I promise I won't go on too long. So one of the areas when I worked with Legal Aid Manitoba and Innocence Canada, one of the ways that leads to the overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples is that in many cultures, including, as Dawnis explained, for Anishinaabe people, telling the truth is one of the most important aspects. And so what you find is offenders often pleading guilty to things, whether they did the crime as articulated or not. So you could be charged with something, and even if that isn't what you did, the belief is that you tell the truth. And so you have people setting out to tell the truth of what they did. And that becomes problematic because the whole system is set up on the premise of someone saying they're not guilty and spending all the time on guilt. So Justice Mandaman, formerly of the federal court, he talked about how when he was working with the Tsuut'ina court in southern Alberta, that a lot of Indigenous justice systems spend this much time on the truth because Indigenous peoples were raised to tell the truth. So you just say, did you do it? The person says yes. And then you spend this much time figuring out, okay, what do we need to do to fix it? And instead, the Canadian justice system is premised on the idea of spending this much time figuring out what happened and this much time on, okay, what is the sentence? And so that neutral policy and neutral place, you wouldn't sort of think about the sort of system as setting up, but what it does is it means when people have crap charges that would never hold up, that would never be found guilty, the system doesn't have that chance to weed them out because people are pleading guilty because they did something, not even necessarily what they were charged, but they might have done something, and so they admit to it. And so that is one of the ways discrimination is impacting. And the AJI has a whole list of things that are evidence of this. And so I think if we look at a system that's taking individuals from our communities and subjecting them to trauma and violence of the criminal justice system, a system that no way reflects our values, we can see how it all is undermining that original promise of having a mutually respectful relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. I will share a few words in under a minute. Oftentimes when we do these kinds of presentations, the presenters don't have a chance to meet before. And so what we started is a journey of kind of that we don't really know where we're going. And oftentimes the creator lets us end up in a place that's really special and good. So I don't know if you are aware, but you are all being in a knowledge mobilization, and you're all being trained as treaty warriors. Because when people tell you stories, it's important they're not just telling the stories, it's important that they're telling the stories to have meaning, and so that you are held responsible for going out and sharing those stories wherever you can. And I also want to acknowledge that even though my last name is Penner, I'm not a Mennonite. I'm a wandering person, and I just happen to have that last name, and I consider myself a scabe or a helper in this work. And so that leads me to the last presenter, who's a fellow professor in our Department of Indigenous Studies, and I want to welcome Christy Anderson to do her presentation. Christy?
If you can get my presentation loaded, that'd be great. I just want to say quickly, I was sitting here thinking I am a junior scholar or emerging scholar, as it were, and I was thinking about how terrifying it was when Ben asked me if I would be willing to put a panel together for this conference. And as I thought about who I would like to sit up here with, and what an honor, and how I've followed their work and just who they are as people in the community, it's kind of like asking someone if they want to go out with you. Like when you send them an email and say, hey, so there's this thing happening. would you be interested? You know, it's so awkward. So thank you both for agreeing to go out with me today. It's truly an honor. And honestly, when I invited these women to be here with me, I said, you can talk about anything, whatever you want. Like, there's so much to talk about when we talk about justice, and that's why you'll notice that the conference abstract is like very broad, right? Because we were trying to pull things together and speak to the things that we're all passionate about and our work. And so I was like, you can talk about anything you want. And it's so funny that Dr. Penner said that if you've noticed, these things are kind of flowing really nicely into each other. And I feel like I was just sitting here listening going, oh, my presentation is going to flow so well into everything that's been presented right before me. So let me get down to it for you. I'll just say a little bit about myself, and I wish I could speak the language as good as my colleague Dawnis, but I'll do my best. Buju Anin, Christy Anderson, Indigenous, Panemuteng, Indoji, Maingan, Indodem, Ninda, Winnipeg, Manitoba. I am Anishinaabe Kwe, an Ojibwe woman with both First Nation and settler heritage that deeply inform my identity and how I come to my work. And to the best of my ability in the Anishinaabe-Moan language, I relayed the following to you all. Hello, greetings. My name is Christy Anderson. My community is Panemuteng First Nation. I'm of the Wolf Clan, and I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba. The spirit name that was gifted to me in ceremony is Old Bear Woman. Although my knowledge of language is limited, I am very grateful to have the ability to introduce myself in a way that helps all of my relations know who I am and where I come from and where I stand in the circle of our community, or what my work is, what my passion is. But of equal importance is the recognition of my settler heritage. My maternal lineage is Mennonite, and I did not know that Brenda also had Mennonite heritage, but that's awesome. And our family roots extend to the 18th century Hortsitsa colony, I hope I said that correctly, yes, located in what is now modern-day Ukraine. Just to situate myself a little bit more, because I always like to make myself human to people in the audience, I am a solo mother of two beautiful, now young men, hard to believe, a long-term resident of Treaty 1 Territory, Winnipeg. I'm tenure track at the University of Winnipeg in the Indigenous Studies Department. And there's a little picture down there that I show because a really important part of me keeping my sanity in check with trying to wear all these hats and juggle all these things is I also choose to lift heavy things and do workouts that almost destroy me multiple times a week. And I even compete while doing these things very, very fast. It's all about balance. So those are a few parts of me that contribute to my own version of Minoba Matsuin, or living a good life. And I wanted to take a moment today because it is October 4th. And so right now, like, I know that I'm honored to live a really good life, but my life was not always this way. So it's really equally an honor for me to be here to share some of the stories of the women that I spoke with and that they gifted into my care for my research project. And I'm going to share about that in a minute, but I just wanted to also pause for a moment to recognize that today is National Day of Action for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and Two-Spirit Persons in Canada. And I just wanted to let you know that briefly, we know that over 1,000 Indigenous women were counted by the RCMP as murdered, and another 400 missing between 1980 and 2012 in their 2014 report, which I did my master's research on. However, many advocates in the community estimate that the number is closer to 4,000 women and girls that have gone missing or been murdered during that same time period. And since Indigenous women make up less than 5% of the total population in this country, this means that we are murdered in this country at a rate of 4.5 to 7 times more than in non-Indigenous women, depending on whose statistics that you're regarding. And we're also more likely than any other woman in this country to be murdered by acquaintances or strangers, which demonstrates that this country is not safe for Indigenous women to simply exist. When we talk about treaty rights, we don't even have the right in this country to just exist as we are, because our lives are seen as less valuable and we're often seen as less than human. While this topic is not the focus of my presentation, it is intimately connected to my work, because the settler colonial narrative is that policing creates community safety. Yet Indigenous women are known to be underserviced and over-policed by settler law enforcement agencies. Before we look at a small snapshot of some of the things Indigenous women shared with me about policing in Winnipeg, I wanted to invite everyone here to attend this fireside chat at the Winnipeg Art Gallery this evening to continue listening and learning about this ongoing national crisis, right from the hearts of those who are affected by it, the family members of women who've been stolen from us and robbed of their own opportunity to continue experiencing Minobamatsuwin, the good life. Okay. So, my approach to research and teaching is founded and firmly rooted in lived experience as theory. Critical Indigenous feminist frameworks invite divergent, non-essentialist perspectives that examine complexities of Indigenous women's lived experiences and are intersectional in that they examine intersecting sites of oppression, including gender, sexuality, race, and colonialism, as they pertain to some of the things you've been hearing here today, the social, economic, and political power of Indigenous women within the settler states. So Indigenous feminist analyses maintain that settler colonialism just simply cannot be divorced from racism and sexism. It's within the system of colonialism. While queer and contemporary Indigenous feminist theorists further profess harmful heteronormativity of heteropatriarchy that we have to be accounted for in intersectional critiques. Indigenous feminists further assert that it's not enough to simply critique power structures. Indigenous feminist analyses are a site of praxis. They should be liberatory in nature. They're an important site of emancipation for all people, not just Indigenous women, all people. So in sum, this theoretical framework that I bring to all of my work values the stories of Indigenous women and counts these stories as knowledge to help us understand the gendered nature and violence of settler colonialism. So just a little bit of context for my research. So that's the Indigenous feminist and queer theoretical frameworks that inform my work. I did my interviewing with women in fall of 2024 through to winter of 2025, and they were semi-structured one-to-one interviews. I did offer cultural protocols for those women that would like to participate in cultural protocols that are popular in this area, including things like being offered tobacco for sharing their knowledge, offering them a gift as a sense of reciprocity because their stories are a gift to me. Not only that, I have a responsibility to care for those stories, but they are a gift. And so I was gifting them something to show them my appreciation. I also paid them $40. I wish I could have paid them more, but ethics is not great to deal with when it comes to paying people for their stories and their knowledge, as some of you will know. And I also made sure that I brought them coffee. I just wanted them to feel like we could have a friendly conversation instead of being me, this researcher, and them, someone in the community. It was like I was trying to establish a relationship with us as we're both like, we're both just Indigenous women sitting down to have a conversation. Like, I really want to hear what you have to say. And also opportunities to provide feedback on work and participate in the analysis, which is, by the way, forthcoming. Pseudonyms were mandatory because the content of this work is could be identifiable, so I did a lot of work to de-identify and try and protect the identity of the women that I spoke with. And I spoke with 14 women who identified themselves as First Nations and or identified by various other nations under the First Nations umbrella. I spoke with one woman who identified themselves as First Nation and Métis, and I spoke with one First Nation trans woman, and one Black woman who somehow ended up at one of my first interviews, and I didn't really know what to do with her, but she ended up being a really wonderful, what I've dubbed informant or witness, because she lives in the community and is very rooted in the community. But she's not included in this today. So my research questions, as you can see, are really what I'm thinking about as I'm going into this work is, what are the needs of Indigenous women and women identifying persons living in Winnipeg to feel safer if and when they have direct or indirect dealings with settler law enforcement officers? And then the other question is, how then can Indigenous women's stories of police violence help shape or reimagine public safety for Indigenous women, girls, and women identifying peoples within the settler colonial state? And you'll see the note there that these are my preliminary thoughts only. My dissertation is currently under construction, so you can't hold me to anything that I say today. But I've done my best to bring something forward that I thought could be interesting and give you a little snapshot into some of the things that the women were telling me, and what those tell me or show me at this time. Now, when I was in the process of doing this research, many of the women came prepared to share their stories. You can see my poster. It says that I'm looking to speak with women specifically about police interactions. And many of them came prepared to share their stories of policing. And unfortunately, many of these included violence, from extreme assaults on bodies and culture to total neglect in times of need. To ensure this project was trauma-informed, I assured women that they could share what they felt comfortable, but they should not feel obligated to share their stories if it would cause them excessive emotional distress. I was concerned for their safety. Most women indicated they felt relief and that they were happy that someone just cared about their voice. And so this is the first time that I'm sharing anything from this research with this audience, and so again, I have a note here. In other words, please be kind. Can someone pass me my water? Thank you. Okay. All right, so here we go. Thank you so much. Firstly, we have to talk about how it became very evident from the beginning, and I mean, this shouldn't be surprising given the reports that we have from other areas of the country and things that we already know. But Indigenous women can't count on police for safety. So some of the participants recounted police response time, which is the first step in trying to receive help, that it's inadequate when they're in danger. So Brooke said, even when I called for service or something, or situations happen and it's like, your call is important to us, please stay on hold. Well, you know, like, I'm almost dead here and I'm getting killed. Could be anybody, but so you'll be getting killed and you don't show up until the next day. And Annie Moose, so just for clarity, there are Moose families within the Indigenous community. I want to clarify that Annie Moose gave her own pseudonym, and it's supposed to be a play on anonymous. So it's not an actual Annie Moose. She came with her own identity, and I thought it was super cute and funny. So Annie Moose, not a real name, said, you know, I just really felt so at risk in that community, and her community was Point Douglas, for those who are local. You can phone the police all you want, but you gotta answer such stupid frickin' questions. Would I be phoning 911 if I didn't think my life was in jeopardy? No, I wouldn't be. But you know, by the time you answer all these darn stupid questions, you're through the shit already. Like they see you're on the phone and they start to leave you alone. I heard from several women that the process of calling for help does not work for them. Most of the women I spoke to live in areas of the city that they love and call home, but are also rife with social and economic issues due to manufactured colonial poverty in these redlined and racialized neighborhoods. These are areas where poverty is common. Drug and alcohol addiction is often used as a coping mechanism for generational trauma that we've already been taught about a little bit this morning. And there are many socioeconomic issues that affect the primarily Indigenous populations living in this area. Annie and Brooke specifically speak to living in these neighborhoods and experiencing danger. But while police are hyper-present in these areas, they often fail to respond to the community's needs for safety, and this begins from the moment when they call for help. Oh, shit. I'm in trouble. You just gave me the 5-minute warning. I have way more to talk about. Okay, so maybe what I'll do, pardon me? Okay. So another point, let's go over here. So this one, maybe I'll skip through this one, but just say really briefly that some participants discussed how police don't investigate crimes against Indigenous women and girls properly. And there's a couple of examples given here where police either were deleting evidence or not collecting evidence to make a case for women when they're in need of support within that criminal legal system that the police are supposed to be there to support. But I do want to not skip over this because this was a huge theme, and you definitely can count that you will see much of this in my dissertation and whatever else I publish for sure, because it rang true for so many of these women. So many Indigenous women expressed that police do what they want, they abuse their power. Brooke again says, and I will make it, known this is not right, but it's my word against theirs, and they always have the last word. So whatever I say, they say, I was drunk, I was drinking, I was doing this. Anything they say will go. And as an Indigenous woman, oh, no. They'll make up whatever they want. So we have no side of the story. No, a lot of people don't. So it's their word against ours, and they're usually the right ones, right? So, in August, when I asked her what she thought police violence looked like, or what she imagined police violence to be, said, I feel like them abusing their power and abusing the power they have because they can pretty much do anything, and they rarely get consequences for their actions. It's just what I think. And then River, profound. And there will be much to analyze in this, but I'll leave it with you here. If you really think about it, the biggest gang in the world are cops. Most, if not all, the women I spoke with identified an abuse of power as being a foundational aspect of police violence. And I wish I could say more. But I'm going to go because I want to finish my presentation, and I'm going way over time, so I'm just going to keep going. Because I think this is important here, especially for the folks here. Now, note the picture on this slide. The Millennium Library is where I met all of my participants over fall and winter, like I told you of last year. And I couldn't help but notice the Winnipeg police cars in downtown Winnipeg with a slogan, "A culture of safety for all." And it caused me to pause and reflect time and again while asking these questions to these women whenever I met with them downtown. And while it's certainly their job to create safety for all, and that is the police narrative, my research shows that Indigenous women in this city don't have the luxury of being able to depend on police fulfilling this duty to everyone equally in this society. For some women, they are aware that white women can count on police safety more than they can, or even white men. Opal, and I'm summarizing Opal's words because she did not wish to be recorded, but she started our time together by asserting that her experience is that as an Indigenous woman living in an urban area, you have to act like Mistikoka, a white man. I hope I said that correctly, Mistikoka. Our people are living in a racist system, in healthcare injustice, When I asked her if she thought white women understood police violence differently from Indigenous women, she replied, white women experience police differently, that white women carry themselves in a different way. The way she walks, talks, and sits, it's structured and safe for her in society. White women carry themselves in ways that say, I'm safe and my feelings count. Indigenous women, we carry a whole lot of other stuff. White women walk in society like they're being looked after, and if anything does happen, they know they have a dad, an uncle, or some other man in their life who's a cop, a lawyer, whatever, and they can get help when they need it. Indigenous women, if we're violated in any way, they say, you should have stayed in the bush, and blame it on us. Even in the West End or on Main Street, when white women have access to a vehicle, they have supports and reassurance. Indigenous women don't have that. Cedar, who is an unhoused trans woman and has many police interactions, shared, like when you're sitting there just struggling and they just walk by you like they don't care. But if it's like their kind of people, like the white skins, the muñas is what we call them in Anishinaabe, they always help their people, but they see us, they don't do anything. That's how I see it. And Annie Moose, who unfortunately had many domestic violence issues to deal with over her lifetime, said, I was always in the wrong. If it's a white guy, I'm always wrong. So Opal speaks to not only the material safety of having access to resources and wealth as a white woman, but also the power and privilege that comes from that material wealth. This materializes in connections in the community to other people with power and privilege that allows white women to walk in some of the more precarious areas in the city with a confidence that many Indigenous women are just not afforded. Cedar's statement demonstrates this reality even clearer. As an unhoused trans woman, she speaks to the invisibility of being poor, unhoused, and Indigenous. Knowing the police will help white people or, quote, their own. And Annie, who unfortunately had these experiences of domestic violence over her lifetime, experienced the heteropatriarchal privilege of white men with police. She was not supported by police in times when her well-being and safety were at risk, especially when in relationships with white men. Finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about women turning to community for safety, and this is where my presentation ends. Reese shared, at my friend's house, I'll say this first. For some women, community is not utopian and perfect. I think sometimes we get this like false idea that Indigenous communities are just these perfect things, but we're rebuilding. We are hanging on and reclaiming the beautiful things of our communities. We don't have things perfect. We don't claim that we have utopian communities. And certainly there were some criticisms and some ideas for improvements to community and grassroots initiatives that came from the women I spoke to. However, Indigenous women turn to community for safety, knowing that colonial heteropatriarchal systems like policing often fail us. So Reese was sharing at a friend's house, there was this one guy that was being really aggressive towards me, and I felt like he might attack me. So I inboxed my cousins, and they showed up in less than like 10 minutes. And I feel like in our community, what kind of provides me safety is my family and our people, because our people stick up for each other, and there's not a lot of people who stick up for us. And I feel like everybody kind of has each other's backs to an extent. Sunny also shared, and I thought this is amazing, there's a family out here that do tend to help keep people safe, especially Indigenous people. And you know, sometimes when something does happen to an Indigenous person, and you know, say that person was in the wrong, not the Indigenous person, but they do tend to call, the family do tend to like be there for them. I mean, if the cops aren't gonna do anything, you know, just call them, the family, and let them know what happened. And know that they come down. You know they're here for you. They're there for you. They're your support, and that's good to have that out here in the city. And finally, Annie as well. Annie had a lot of stories to tell, but I really appreciated Annie's perspective when she was sharing about the First Nations Indigenous warriors and their community work protecting and finding missing Indigenous women in this city, a job that should be being done by the police, who are getting paid lots of money to do that work, but that they often fail to do. It's our community members that are getting together and collecting, and that collectively, with no money, no resources, no funding, and looking for the women. And Annie shared, I always say, there is no justice. There is just us. Thank you.
Well, that brings to an end the presentations, but we have 10 minutes for questions. And I know, are there online questions as well? Okay, so I am stepping out of the way and leaving it to our newly trained treaty warriors to come up and ask questions if they have them of our esteemed and wonderful panel that related gifts to us. So the floor is yours.
Thank you all for the... Can you hear me? Try again? Now? Okay. Thank you all for those important and moving presentations. You've very clearly, in this short time you've been allotted, showed us the deep issues that exist. What can us, who are primarily white, privileged people who care about these issues, do you have some suggestions, some advice, some guidance for us who want to help?
I'll take that for now. I'll say I would follow in the footsteps of Marge and just show up. Just show up. The powwows have open invitation. They're open to the public. There's lots of events like the Day of Action. There's a whole calendar. If you look at the First Nations Caring Society of Canada, they have a whole calendar throughout the year of days of action. We're coming on the heels of September 30th, and then October 4th, and then there's going to be more throughout the year. There's open invitations to come, to learn, to stand with us, to walk with us, to be a good relative. Mm-hmm. Because you don't have to worry about it, whether it's your place or your role or if you have a purpose. Because remember, I'm related to all of creation. Our people will find their relation to you. That's the first thing they do. They say, where are you from? Who's your parents? Who's your grandparents? And they'll figure out how you're related. Because in our epistemologies, we're all relatives to each other. And I just want to say, I want to acknowledge that when we were out on Friday, we were outside here, and on my way into work, I got a bunch of emails about our responsibility to protect freedom of expression on campus. And I also got newsletters that talked about like remaining silent and non-engagement, because there was somebody here who was here to deny residential schools and to cast our call to bring our children home from residential school, those who are buried, those who are in unmarked graves, those who are missing, those who are disappeared by the Canadian state, and who we hold sacred obligations to as of like the report. I don't know the name of the report. You have to look it up. I always just search sacred obligations in Kim Murray. I haven't yet memorized it. But the security chose not to engage. They said they couldn't do anything. the administration of our university said they couldn't do anything. The police were called. I don't know if they said they couldn't do anything, but they didn't show up. And you know who showed up? Grandmother Shingu showed up. And as soon as I saw her coming onto the campus, and the Indigenous students were there, they were taking down posters calling the acknowledgement of the graves at Residential School a hoax. On Truth and Reconciliation Week, in front of the flag that we all just got and put up on Monday, and behind the installation of the orange shirts, and she was coming up in her orange shirt. And I said, well, that's it then. I told my friend, because she was asking me if I was going to go out because we were not supposed to go out, I guess. And then I said, well, Grandma's here. That's it, I'm here. And she was the one who confronted her when nobody else did. And when she talked about it, I was there. I made sure I was there to listen and witness, because that's a huge role. Witnessing is a huge role. Witnessing and carrying that story forward and the truth is an incredible role. And I took that role. And she said, I had to come to speak for those little ancestors that never made it home. And she said, I know because I was there. And I was reminded to my kuku who wanted to take the Truth and Reconciliation Commission when they had the payments, and she wanted me to take her statement and help her with it because I was in law school. Not that I knew anything, but I tried to tell my kuku, I said, you know, kuku, I said, this isn't what they pay for. I was like, they pay for this, they pay for this, they pay for this. This is what they want to hear, because these are grounds that you can get compensated for in Canadian law. And I asked her those questions, and she said, I'm not here to talk about that. And I said, and I was trying to think well, kuku, you're not going to get much money, and this is what this process is for, to be able to get money. But she's my kuku, right? So I listen. That's my kuku. I follow them. I carry their bags. So it doesn't matter if I have a law degree, I'm still a bag carrier, just a highly educated one. And she said, I need to tell them about my friend who was beaten and had welts on her back, and she got sick. And they came in the night and they took her upstairs. And I snuck up there. They weren't feeding her. They weren't giving her water. Her forehead was hot and her lips were dry. And so I took this little cream I had from home. And I don't know if it's bear grease or if it was Vaseline, because you don't interrupt when kuku is talking. But she said, I took it and I put it on her lips, my friend. And I went down back to my bed. And she said, I heard a thud. And I heard footsteps. And I heard more footsteps, and that's the last I saw or heard of my friend. That's what I need to say. And that's what I saw in Grandma Shingu's. People were saying, don't make her money, don't give her attention, don't play into or buy into this strategy. She's not worth it. And Grandma Shingu said, I need to speak for those children because we still have to bring them home. They're there. We know they're there. And we have work to do. So I want to also acknowledge we talked about the TRC and the 94 calls to action. We talked about the National Inquiry MMIWG and the 231 calls to justice. And the report that I don't know the name of. Oh, wait, here. Okay. The report of the independent special interlocutor released her final report. It's called Upholding Sacred Obligations, Reparations for Missing and Disappeared Indigenous Children in Unmarked Burials in Canada. And there's a distinction, and I'm waiting for their day. I don't know, we're gonna have to pick something before this comes maybe, but I'm gonna go and have a day where we honor our obligations and speak about them. Because there's a difference between being missing and being disappeared. Mm-hmm. And being, these children were disappeared by the Canadian state. And all of those calls, every single one of us has a call to action that is relevant to us. Every single one of us has a call to justice that is relevant to us. Every single one of us has a sacred obligation that is relevant to us. Read the report and find yours and just show up. Miigwech.
Can I quickly add to it when we're done? Okay. Yeah. I know I'm standing between you and coffee, and for me that's a big deal because I ran out. So I just, thank you, Dawnis. I just wanted to add one thing that I've been increasingly sharing with audiences around truth and reconciliation. Is learning the truth is really important, and the survivors that I had the privilege of working with always said it's truth before reconciliation, and they felt still very much stuck in the truth phase and weren't ready to work on reconciliation yet. And one of the things that I've really learned about truth, it's hearing the truth and believing the truth. And so my first recommendation is that when you hear truths, believe them. You have just heard and witnessed someone's truth. It is their truth. Your job is to believe them. If something isn't sitting right, if you feel that a sort of urge to question something about that truth, stop yourself. Don't question the person who shared the truth. Question yourself. What is it that this truth is rubbing up against in you? What is your sort of preconceived idea or your experience in Canada that is different, that is leading you to have a hard time believing the truth? So just when you're hearing people's stories and their truth, that is a really good time to start addressing the very different experiences that one might have in Canada, that your truth may not look like their truth. And so we need to really believe survivors and people when they share their stories. And then also that reconciliation is an active thing, right? We all know good relationships. Hopefully we don't all know bad relationships, but they require work to make a good and keep a good relationship, right? And so one of the things that I think particularly this room is you reach and sit with people that we may not sit with, right? So you have, I think Stephen's been using the word treaty warriors now, right? So you have information, so sharing that now out into your circles and using any power and privilege you have, right? So when I look at, voting patterns and what different parties represent and the commitments that different parties have made, thinking about sharing those around election times, and that we all engage in the democracy for ourselves, yes, but also for others. And so I think taking that time to do action and using any power and privilege you have. And then the last thing that I just started to do, because I really love David A. Robertson, he's one of my favorite authors. He has his 52 ways to reconcile how to walk with Indigenous peoples on the path of healing. I got the audiobook this week, and I had known nothing about it, but actually what it is, it never even dawned on me that 52 is the number of the weeks in the year. So the book is actually something you can do every week of the year towards reconciliation. And so he has a step-by-step, 52 things you can do, from like book clubs to movies to, I'm only on week 14. So, but yeah, there's another great resource on some very concrete, very beginning steps you can take.
Well, thank you for those beautiful gifts and learning. And I just want to say we never say goodbye in Indigenous cultures. So, Bamapi Minwa Kwabman. We'll see everybody later. Thank you. Miigwech Ekosani.